and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me on tonight's episode is Jeremy Gruber, the head of artist marketing and digital strategy for Friends at Work. In his current role, Jeremy represents artists including John Legend and Charlie Puth, among many others. He spent over a decade working with artists at all levels, helping them grow their brand and businesses by bringing together traditional marketing with the latest technology. After graduating with a music industry degree from USC, he started his career helping to manage the wine label, public speaking, and corporate career of Mick Fleetwood at Sabre Entertainment. He then ran digital for 10th Street Entertainment and 11/7 Music, working with bands including Mötley Crüe, Roach, and Blondie. In 2010, he joined Concord Music Group, helping to establish the direct-to-consumer team and build the digital marketing and strategy department, where he worked with legends like Paul Simon, Paul McCartney, and James Taylor. Jeremy was also an adjunct professor in the USC Music Industry Program, where he taught music marketing for 6 years and was a partner in the marketing tech platform found.ee, which sold to Downtown Music in 2021. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you on the podcast. How's it going?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Excited to get started. All right. Well, with that, are you ready for the first question?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Imagine for a second you are sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note, and what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
On a personal note, the only thing I keep coming back to is to learn to take care of myself physically and mentally earlier in my life. That's not really something I got into until my late 20s and really in my 30s that I figured out that learning to use my body and really take care of myself is an important part of staying healthy and being able to contribute. So I'm in a much better place now, but I wish I had known that sooner. I think that's something that the generation coming up now is much better at than my generation was and much more aware of. Professionally, there's something that I actually had to learn the hard way, which is really to trust my ideas and know that my perspective is unique and be willing to speak up. I was never really afraid to speak up in meetings. I didn't really have my first job in the music industry until I was 25. I had worked at a small company before that was kind of in different marketing that had some music clients, but wasn't strictly a music industry company. But then I got into the core music industry working for Alan Kovac when I was 25, and then joined Concord, the big record label, when I was 27. And at Concord, there was really a moment when I learned to trust my ideas and sharing my ideas as a unique perspective, and know that just because the people around me were more experienced didn't necessarily mean that anything I had to bring to the table wasn't as valuable. And that really propelled my career a lot, learning that. And in some ways it was letting go. I used to tell the story differently, and I acknowledge that there's an amount of privilege in the way I used to tell this story, which is basically stop caring. I used to care a lot about what people thought. And, I am a well-educated, person from an upper middle class family and a lot of privilege growing up. And I recognize that being able to walk into a room, I'm a big guy, I get to have that level of authority that not necessarily everybody does, even when I was 27 or 28 years old. So I won't phrase it that way, but just learning to trust that your perspective is unique. And then that's your ideas and your experiences are processing information in a way that nobody else has. So even if you think that what's in your head is obvious, say it out loud, because it's going to spark an idea that rolls down the hill. So now I think that being willing to ask questions and engage, but also being resourceful enough to figure out the answers yourself is really a great way to, get recognized in a room. And then also listen first is, I guess, the other side of that. I used to be a mentor at Techstars, which is the biggest tech accelerator. They had a music program in LA for 6 years, and they have a big neon sign that says "Give First" on the wall. That's one thing that I always really loved. But also, my first boss was a salesperson, like a true Glengarry Glen Ross. If you haven't seen that movie or play, you should. Salesperson, really focused on sales. And he always taught me that the first part of sales was listening. and so that you're selling to what your buyer actually wants. Well, we're all salespeople. When you're in that conference room, you are selling your ideas. That is what it is. So learning sales skills will accelerate your career. There's nothing in the world that you are doing that sales will not help. And the first rule of sales is to listen.
Yeah, that's really great advice. All right, next question. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that's no different in the music industry. Sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they can be quite good. So, what's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
So I was actually really excited when I heard this was one of the questions because I've started saying this for the last year in different ways. And that is really that the gatekeepers are gone. It doesn't, nobody can stop you anymore. The playing field is level. Every single person who wants to create music or help people create music has the exact same opportunity to succeed as a major label signed artist or a team or a team that has a major label behind them. That was not always true. I think that that's really a development in the last 4 years that it's actually level. It's been leveling for about the last 15 years, but the actual level playing field is in the last 4 years. And what that means is that it's the best time ever to be an independent artist. It means that the majors don't have any levers that they can pull that can guarantee their success for their artists over you, which means that anybody can figure it out. Anybody has equal opportunity. There's one other kind of like 1B of that secret is that nobody knows what they're doing. That's not a new idea. I think that's been true for a long time. But I think that there used to be a time when the A&R person's like ears, you could have a Clive Davis who could find, the best, or Lucian Grange in their time, and those people who could find artists on a regular basis who could break through. Ahmed Ertegun before them. Now that still exists. A&R is probably the most valuable skill in the creation of music besides being an artist in the core industry side. But on the marketing side, on the promotion side, on the getting new fan side, it is the Wild West. So have a great time. That means it's the best time ever to do it. And it's scary, but it's liberating.
So, you kind of touched on it earlier, but in addition to your work with artists, you have a passion for tech and music tech startups. So, where did your interest in tech originate, and how has it played a role in the way that you approach your full-time position?
Oh, thank you. That's a good question. So yeah, I have a successful exit as a partner in a startup. We sold Found.ee. It's found.ee. Semi plug. I'm not involved at all. To Downtown a couple years ago. I was a mentor at Techstars, like I said. I actually am in the process of becoming an advisory board member on a couple of startups at the moment. That was actually where my career started accelerating. Was recognizing the connection between technology and music. I graduated from USC in 2005, which is a really interesting time to graduate because it was a music industry program. I had been taught the music industry for 4 years prior. In 2006, 80% of record retail had gone out of business. So the entire industry that I had been taught had been essentially dismantled by technology by the time I was actually in the business. In 2008 or 2009, there was a company that was really making some headway called Topspin. And some people might remember this, some people might not. But the idea that they were pushing sounds like the way we do marketing for everything right now. It was called direct to consumer. And it was the idea that prior to the technology boom of the music industry, marketing for musicians was essentially you get signed to a label or you tour to get an audience. You get signed to a label, they get you written about in publications, they get you played on the radio, you tour, you sell records, you make a living. If you do it well, you sell a lot. If you don't, that's the end. That's the risk. That was the kind of oversimplification of it. In 2008, we had all of a sudden this moment where it's like, let's give everybody content. Let's just make stuff and give it to them for free. But not really for free in exchange for data, in exchange for their email address. So Topspin was the first company that created a little piece of HTML code that you could put on a website and say, give me your email address and I'll give you an MP3. Now that sounds quaint, right? In 2008, an MP3 had a 99-cent value. So I had to convince record label executives, be willing to give away this MP3 in exchange for this email address. We all know now email addresses are worth a lot more than 99 cents. Back then, they had no idea. And we all know now that nobody wants MP3s anymore. But the idea is we were exchanging content for data. And that was an extraordinarily powerful thing that I really just understood viscerally was going to matter. My boss at the time also was a visionary, and he thought advertising was going to be the future and that artists were going to own their audience and make money from advertising. We were both kind of right. What he thought was going to be the future became essentially YouTube, and people make a ton of money from advertising on YouTube, now TikTok. What I thought was going to be the future is essentially now social media marketing and email marketing and CRM and all the ways that we engage with fans, which is just marketing for music. It's all digital marketing at this point. And really, when you boil it down, whether it was Topspin in 2008, Facebook marketing, which also started around 2008, 2009, and Twitter, Instagram in the 2010s. I can explain why I never really liked Snapchat for that reason. All the way through to TikTok today, all it has been is creating and distributing content, collecting data from that content, and then using that data to sell things to people or get them to stream. And that's all facilitated by technology. So the technology I'm most interested in is whatever allows that to happen.
That's really cool. Sales, back to sales. It all comes full circle. Final question. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, I'll bet there was one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
It's a very good question. As much as the music industry continues to evolve, what are the elements that don't change? There's a lot of them, but I think first of all that quality and great songwriting will always win. I think that's something. I was reading a lot of books in the last year about the kind of executives that shaped the industry, and some of them are great and some of them are not as valuable for education reasons. And the one I think is probably the most valuable for understanding where we are is called The Last Sultan, which is the biography of Ahmet Ertegun. The reason I say that one, and I learned this from my students at USC, is we all know that the major label system as it exists right now isn't serving necessarily developing artists' needs. It's serving the music industry, obviously it's huge, but it's not serving necessarily what's developing and breaking artists. But how did it get there? And none of my students knew where it came from. And I think reading The Last Sultan really gives you a good history of how we got here. But things that haven't changed are artists want to create art pretty much no matter what. I mean, he was finding blues singers in the middle of nowhere and recording them and helping promote them and make them. And these were just artists. That's just what they did. These were people who just played music. And I feel like we still have that in different ways throughout our world. And audiences are always going to want great music to be created and distributed and to discover it. I think the Chapel Roan story of the last year is a great example of that. The fact that Pink Pony Club was recorded years ago, that has always been the case, that like just awareness is more important, and finding people, finding the tribe, finding the listeners is the ongoing challenge, and it has nothing to do with quality. Quality will always be there. Figuring out how to find that tribe is always going to be the challenge. I think there are so many things that have kind of always been there and will always be, and learnings we can take from the history that a lot of people aren't either taking the time to educate themselves about, or we're not talking about. And I think that that's a really valuable conversation about like what isn't changing. We spend so much time talking about what we think the future is going to be, but like honestly, most of my career, I think the reason that I have been somewhat successful is I'm good at knowing what to ignore. I'm good at knowing what kind of doesn't matter in the flashy trends. And a lot of people get caught up in them. And I think that knowing what doesn't change is part of that.
I think that's a really great perspective, and I think you nailed it with that question. So great job. All right. Well, it's about time we close out tonight's episode. But Jeremy, thanks again for joining me. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to everyone listening, hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. See you next time.